Welcome, everyone, to the Boiling Point Podcast. I am your host, JD, and this is episode 98, What's Really Going On with Ukraine and Russia. Joining me for this episode is the founder of Americas Tribune, David Rooslet, which I am going to be calling him Roos whenever he comes on the episode. No, he is not a Bolton for the Game of Thrones fans. Marcus Frederiksen played us in ReverbNation.com/Marcus Frederiksen to check his music out and go to Facebook, The Humankind, and get some apparel. Americas Tribune is available on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter. Go and check them out. Give them a follow, a like, shares, all that. The Boiling Point Podcast is on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, and Parler for anybody who's still on Parler. And then, of course, JDEDESIGNz is on Facebook and Instagram. Instagram is JDE Poster Designs. That's with a Z at the end of it. And before we get into this episode, and I fully welcome Matt to the episode, I wanted to shout out, we are shooting this. It is Veterans Day on the day that we're shooting this. So I want to give a special shout out to the vets over at Sky Tribe. Go check them out. There's links to their pages in the description of this video. They're on Facebook and they have their own website. Make sure you check them out. Consider donating. They do a great cause. Dave, Roos, if I may. Welcome to the Boiling Point Podcast. Welcome back to the Boiling Point Podcast. You've been on before for our election episode. We got good feedback and good views from that, so I'm hoping this is another one. We're going to talk about what's actually going on in Ukraine and Russia. I have two other episodes that talk about this when it was first happening, but it wasn't how relevant information was it. We were kind of speculating more than anything on those episodes. So Dave's going to give us some facts here and tell us what is actually going on between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, it's funny because I actually did a video. I used to have a site called Seed of Truth. It was seedoftruth.com, and when I had that site, I did these type of broadcasts as well. And I actually did a piece back then. I was actually talking about Syria and all the reasons why the United States was interested in Syria. And I, inside of explaining what the U.S. Interests were in that area, I had included all this information about all the stuff that was going on with Russia and Ukraine and the gas pipelines that they've been fighting over for quite some time. And for me, when I first started researching this stuff, it kind of opened my eyes to a lot of different things about how different economic systems work. And what I mean by economic systems, take the dollar, for example. Most people have no idea what a dollar actually is. And it's something that everybody has and everybody tries to get more of. And we never stop and think about where did this concept come from? Like how is it that this country produces these pieces of paper, and these pieces of paper are actually worth something? So
I think most people think that the government just prints it.
Yeah, no, that's the government really, if you think about it, the government doesn't print anything. You see, in 1913, Woodrow Wilson, who became our president at that time, Woodrow Wilson was funded pretty much by these bankers, international bankers. The United States almost went bankrupt from the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s. And when the U.S. almost went bankrupt, J.P. Morgan had to step in and pretty much bail out the country. And when he did that, he kind of got together with some of his banker buddies and came up with a system that he wanted to kind of sell to the United States. And he did it by helping Woodrow Wilson to get elected as president. And once Wilson got elected as president, he passed what was called the Federal Reserve Act. And the Federal Reserve Act pretty much established the central bank, we'll say that privately owned central bank, because these central bankers are these international bankers. They established this entity, and they said, hey, look, we'll print whatever money you want us to print. Give us the right to print your dollar, and we'll print it for you. And you have all of this gold. Now, gold is something of value, right? So if you think about it, a car, you want a car. You go, you look at a car has a particular value. Well, it's funny because let's say a car is worth $1 of gold. If I print only $1 for every bar of gold that I have, then a car, if it costs a 1 bar of gold, a car is going to cost $1, right? But if I print $2 or $10, let's say I print $10 for every bar of gold, now I've just inflated that value of the dollar, and now the dollar's worth less. And now it takes 10 of those same dollars to buy that same car. The car is still worth 1 bar of gold. It's still going to be worth the same bar of gold, but it matters how many dollars are in existence, how many dollars are able to be acquired inside of the economy. That's what kind of dictates the demand, the supply. The supply of the dollar dictates the value of that dollar. Now, the reason why I'm talking about the dollar, if you want to understand what's going on in Russia, right? Because going back to 1913 and talking about the creation of the Federal Reserve Act, how does that relate to the things that we're seeing going on in Russia and Ukraine, and why is that important? Well, you see that agreement that we made with these bankers, Woodrow Wilson said, okay, we'll sign the Federal Reserve Act into law, which they did in 1913. And the banker said, hey, here's the thing. If you guys need more dollars or more money, don't tell us to just print more, because the more dollars that we print for you, the less value they're going to be. So Wilson said, hey, okay, so, well, what do we do then? And the banker said, well, you can borrow it from us, 8% interest. So Wilson's like, borrow it? What do you mean? How do we borrow money from you? With a federal government, we don't make money, so how do we pay you back? Well, coincidentally, the same year that the Federal Reserve Act was passed, they passed the federal income tax. Now, if you go and look up the federal income tax before 1913, it was illegal for the federal government to tax the people. There was no tax on your labor by the federal government. The state government, yes, but not by the federal government. So they passed the Federal Income Tax Act, or they passed it into law in 1913. And what that did is it made it so that these bankers, right, can loan the United States money, and anytime the United States owes them money, what happens is the U.S. government, the federal government, will tax the people until that debt is paid. So this is how taxation started. This is how the federal government started taxing people, right? This is actually, if you listen to our last broadcast, we were talking about the national debt. We were going crazy trying to figure out where we can find how much our national debt is, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is where it all started, 1913. So this, it's funny because these bankers, they didn't just do this with the United States. They went and started doing this with countries all over the world. Like I said, they're international bankers. So they set up this agreement with countries all over the world. Now, if you think about it, if I'm an international banker and you're country A and I got my buddy over here who's country B, right? And let's say I'm the international banker, you're country A, and my buddy's country B. And I set up an agreement with you that I'll print all your money, whatever you need printed, but if you need more money, you can borrow it from me, pay me back 8% interest. And what I do, here's the catch. Until you pay me back, I'm going to take some of your gold as collateral. So all the gold that's on the U.S. Treasury, anytime the U.S. borrows money, the gold goes from the books of the U.S. Treasury over to the books of the privately owned Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve, yeah. Now, just to touch on a couple things, this federal taxation started around the same time as the Federal Reserve.
The federal income tax was actually passed while Congress was on Christmas break.
And what year was this?
1913.
1913. And I believe it was very shortly after that the Department of Justice was created, or also around that same time, if I'm not mistaken.
I would have to research that. But
yeah, I'd have to check my notes to be sure, because I'm working on an episode about the DOJ and whether or not it's constitutional, and I'm pretty sure it all happens around that same time, 1910 to 1915. A lot of things happened in that time, and I think that's part of it too. So it's interesting that you say that also happened during that frame of time.
Yeah, and the what happened. Think about what happened right after 1913. We get into 1914. Do you know what's so big about 1914? Austria and Hungary, World War I. So think about this for a minute. If I'm an international banker and you're country A and my buddy over here is country B, and I say to you, I'll loan you the money, and then you just pay me back with interest. And then what I do is I start to finance different presidents to do certain things for me. And those certain things would be things that would start wars. Why do I want to start a war if I'm an international banker? Why am I funding this dictator and that dictator and having them do things that cause war? Mostly because if I can get you to fight with my buddy over here, if I can get you two to fight, what are you going to do when all of a sudden he starts bombing you? You're going to come to me and you're going to say, hey, I need tanks and I need bombs and I need guns and I need planes, right? All of a sudden the war machine, the military industrial complex, that kicks in, right? And now, in order for you to make all of these weapons, what do you have to do first? You have to come to me. And you have to borrow the money from me. So essentially what I did was I found a way to get into every country, right? Because these central banks are everywhere now. I found a way to get into every single country, set the government up so that they borrow the money from me.
Yeah.
And they tax their people. In other words, as an international banker, I just took a piece of every single person's labor.
Yeah.
So now,
just a quick side note. It actually wasn't the Department of Justice. It was the FBI, or what was the beginnings of the FBI in 1908. They were founded in 1908. The DOJ existed, I think, 10 or 15 years before that, though it was something different. The creation of the FBI started leading it down a different direction. But that's for another episode, not for this one.
Yeah, so I love looking at things like the FBI and the CIA. Like you look at, especially the time frames of J. Edgar Hoover and Allen Dulles, because that was right around the time with Kennedy and the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
And dude, I've got an entire piece for that. I'm not going to go into it in this episode, but I've got an entire piece for that is just absolutely mind blowing. But for this here, now that I've given you an idea of what these bankers did, they came in, they set up this currency, right? And
how does this relate to the Ukraine and Russia then?
So the number one thing to remember is that when when these dollars were printed, they were printed in a certain way. And I'm about to show you one of the, most people would know what this is, right? This is a gold certificate.
Yeah.
So what is a gold certificate? Why did money look like this back in the day, and today it's called a Federal Reserve note? What happened? What happened? Like, why does this say that the Treasury of the United States, if you take this certificate, you could have gone to any bank and given them the certificate, and they would give you that much in gold? So when our system first got set up, and you fast forward out to the 1940s with the Bretton Woods agreements, we were pegged to gold. And the reason we were pegged to gold is because the United States controls 75% of the world's gold supply. We have 75% of the world's gold supply. So the United States, what they did was they kind of made an arrangement so that all of the currencies in the world, and I'm not saying all of them, some of them, I should say, pegged their currencies to our dollar. And it's because our dollar was backed by 75% of the gold in the world. Now, if you look at our dollar, right, what exactly is it? So if you think about it, you got gold, right, that's inside of the banks. So everybody would take their gold and they would bring it down to the bank. And what a bank was, it wasn't a place to get money. It was a place for people to store their gold. That's what it was. It was a gold vault. That's what a bank originally started as. They were gold vaults. And bankers charged fees for people to keep their gold there. And those, when they came in, they would give them whatever gold that they had, and they got these receipts. So those receipts are what you would need. You would have to go to the bank and give them the receipt in order to get your gold. Well, that's what dollars are. That's what dollars were. They were receipts for gold that had been deposited in the banks.
That's what they're supposed to be, at least. Yeah.
That's what the original intention of a dollar was.
Yeah.
But that changed. And we had I think it was 1945 is when we first saw our president, it was Franklin Roosevelt, established an alliance with Saudi Arabia. And the inside of this alliance, he created a peg to the dollar, and it's called the petrodollar. And the petrodollar is, so we ended up with an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Now, everybody knows Saudi Arabia produces oil, right? Yeah. Well, this agreement with Saudi Arabia is that they would only take petrodollars. So if a country wanted to purchase oil from Saudi Arabia, they had to first purchase these petrodollars, and these petrodollars were they had to use U.S. dollars in order to buy them. So the petrodollars, they could purchase them with their currencies, but the petrodollar was pegged to the U.S. dollar. Now, the funny thing, the difference is, some people would say, well, why didn't they just use the dollar? Well, the difference is the petrodollar had restrictions. You could not use the petrodollar for any type of imports. So Saudi Arabia making all of these petrodollars like crazy because they got all this oil that's being exported. They couldn't use those petrodollars to buy things in the open market outside of oil. So what they had to do is they had to exchange those petrodollars with the U.S. in exchange for the U.S. offered. We sent our military to protect their oil fields. We gave them different technologies that we traded with them. So these were the agreements that our government set up, and it wasn't just in 45, but other presidents had also continued on this tradition. And it wasn't until the 1970s when everything started to collapse. And if there's people older than me, I mean, I was born in 75, but if there's people older than me that might remember the 1970s and the long gas lines, right? And actually, I think I have a picture here of some of the things that were going on back then. And this is drivers lined up for fuel.
There you go.
Gas stations, and people were, if you look at the sign, it says they limit $3 per customer. You can only get $3 in gas. That's
only a couple of gallons,
right? Well, I don't know how much, and maybe back then I think it was like, I don't know, 25 cents a gallon, maybe 23 cents.
You know what? I looked that up. What was the date on that? It was
that was 1974. So that's when prices started to, And the reason why that's 1974, like this stuff started in 1971. It was Richard Nixon that took us off of the Bretton Woods system. He took us off of the gold standard. Now, if you think about this for a minute, why did Nixon take us off of the gold standard?
53 cents was the national average in 1974. So $3 got you just under 9 gallons. You got 8 gallons or so.
If you go to 1970, I guarantee it's 4 times cheaper because the price of gas quadrupled in 1974.
Let's check that out real quick. 1970, 36 cents a gallon.
Huh.
So that is still substantially cheaper. You're talking about 4 years. That's quite the inflation in 4 years. Right. Considering that, 1969 it was 35 cents, 1970 36, 1971 36, 1972 36. Like it's 36 cents a gallon there for a
then it jumps
for a couple of years. Actually it's 36 cents for all the way until 1972. And then in 1973, it jumps 3 cents. And then in 1974, it jumps 20 more cents. So, yeah, that is a significant jump if you're looking at the past.
Yeah. And one of the biggest reasons is because Richard Nixon, took us off of the Bretton Woods system because he took us off of the gold standard, essentially. And it was because there was a run on the dollar. And what is a run? Like, do you know what a run is? A run on the dollar? When we had made all these agreements with these other countries to peg their currencies to the dollar.
Yeah.
And we told them, if you peg your currency to the dollar and you buy these petrodollars, if you peg your currency to the dollar, you can exchange your currency depending on what it was worth. Maybe, some currencies were worth, it was like 5 of their, whatever their dollars were, whether it's Deutschmarks or, liras, 5 of them for $1. Okay. So whatever it was, they could exchange their currency, not for a US dollar, but they could actually get the gold. And that's what the US government promised. And that was up until 1971 when Richard Nixon terminated that. He said, you can no longer get any of the gold. So now, from 1971 on, our currency was no longer backed by gold.
Yeah.
So if your currency is not backed by gold, we call that, if there's really nothing of value backing it, we call it a fiat currency, right?
Yeah.
But what is that? Like, how does our dollar get value, and why is it the most valuable currency in the world. I say most valuable currency, but I mean, there are other currencies that it costs us more dollars to get. The euro was one of them.
Yeah.
When
anymore.
it first came out, it wasn't. When it first came out, it was like 81 cents to the dollar. Do you know what changed that?
No, I don't.
So this actually plays into that. It actually plays into how the euro was born and developed into one of the main currencies in the market. And it's funny how, this episode is about Ukraine and Russia. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the dollar, and now we're talking about oil, right?
Yeah, and because the euro, yeah.
In order to understand what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, you kind of have to have a little bit of a background on what drives the economy, and not just the economy, but pretty much the entire world. I think everybody at this point in 2022 is experiencing an awakening of how valuable oil and gas are in our system.
Yeah.
And that supply, not just the fact that, it's there, but the amount that we have available to us. So we have, in 1971, we have Nixon taking us off of this gold standard. Now, at the same time, it was about within about a 3-year period. So it actually was 1974. It was right after 1974. Like, we had those long lines and gas going through the roof. So what we did in 1974, we made a deal with OPEC. Now, OPEC is just this conglomeration of countries. It's a conglomeration of countries that it was created in 1960. And in 1960, there were a few countries that got together to create this cartel of oil-producing nations. Yeah. And it was Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Now, those countries, they were joined by several other countries later, but those countries are the original countries that started OPEC. And in 1974, OPEC actually issued an embargo against the United States. And they issued the embargo against the United States because we were supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. And Saudi Arabia didn't take very kindly to that, so they put an embargo on us, and they stopped sending oil and gas. And that left our supplies low. And with economics, with a low supply and a high demand, you get huge prices. And those huge prices on that is what cause inflation. It looks a lot like what's going on in the United States today. Only it's not with Saudi Arabia, it's with Russia. And to understand Russia, we're not talking about oil, and we're not talking about gasoline. We're talking about natural gas. Yeah. And you see that if you fast forward from the 1970s to, let me see, how about 1997? 1997 was a great year. I loved 1997. I think at that time I was kind of chilling. I think I was living in Jersey at the time, listening to whatever new Pearl Jam songs were out.
I was a freshman in high school in 97.
Nice. Yeah.
Good times.
For me, in 1997, well, I won't go into that. So 1997, we saw, most people don't know, the Taliban right? Everybody learned about the Taliban in 2001.
Yeah.
With September 11th, right? But check this out. Well, we're going to get into all kinds of stuff. And I skipped over a lot too. But in 1997, the United States was given the Taliban tours. And they had been coming here from 1997 to 1999. And we had been giving them tours, bringing them over here, taking them to Nebraska, to Houston. They toured NASA. We showed them around the Space Center, the headquarters. We brought them out to DC, and
weren't they our allies in the 70s against Russia?
Weren't necessarily our allies. We were funding them.
Yeah.
We were funding them, but they weren't our allies.
We were giving them money and guns too.
We were essentially trying to give the Russians their version of Vietnam. Vietnam was heavy on us as far as like it cost this country a lot of money and a lot of lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Russia had their conflicts going with Afghanistan back then, and we were actually funding. It was actually Zygmunt Brzezinski. He was I want to say he was the Secretary of Defense at the time. And Brzezinski was giving money hand over fist to the Taliban, who at that time was headed up by a man by the name of Osama bin Laden. And the United States pretty much built the Taliban, Al Qaeda, you name it.
Let's not get too much into that. We're going to save that for another episode. In fact, Roos and I think are going to.
It actually plays pretty good into this, and the reason it plays into this is because, when we were touring them around here, and it was in July of 1999 that they were here for about 5 weeks. And they were touring like Mount Rushmore, and like we were handling all their expenses. And it was Taliban military leaders. Like these people were like straight up thugs.
Yeah.
And it was the University of Nebraska at Omaha that was courting these guys. And it was at the discretion of the U.S. government, because the U.S. government was trying to use the university to convince the Taliban to allow the United States, or to grant us pipeline rights in Afghanistan for a big oil pipeline. Now, that was in 1999. So in 2000, George Bush runs for president. Now, the Taliban was in Texas being courted by all these oil tycoons. Now, who do we know is a big oil tycoon? The Bush family, right?
Yeah.
And who exactly did George Bush tap to be his vice president? Mr. Dick Cheney. And Dick Cheney was the head of what company?
Halliburton.
He was the head of Halliburton. Now, why is Halliburton so important? You see, here's where we transition from oil to gas. So George Bush taps Dick Cheney to be his vice president. Dick Cheney is the head of Halliburton. Halliburton is this company that has the patents for this drilling mechanism that goes down into the earth, goes over at an angle, and actually cracks or fracks the earth so that it can release these natural gases. This is how we get natural gas out of the earth. And Halliburton was, I believe, the second largest energy producing company in the world. And their CEO gets tapped to be the vice president while we're trying to court the Taliban in 1999. Well, the Taliban turned us down. They turned us down for that pipeline. That was probably the worst decision they've ever made. Why? Because they turned us down in August. On October 15th, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 1267 declaring Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban terrorists.
Mm.
So we declared them terrorists right after they denied us the rights to this pipeline. A few months later, actually, I'm sorry.
Almost a year.
A few months. It was actually a year and a few months because that was in October of 99.
Of 99, yeah. So a year and a few months.
September.
So almost 2 years.
Now, in between that, there was one thing that happened that kind of shook the country. Saddam Hussein, who was the head of Iraq, which we know is one of the OPEC companies, right? OPEC countries.
Yeah,
now, OPEC had a deal with Nixon in 1974 where any country in the world that is going to buy oil from any oil producing country has to first, they can no longer pay with their currencies. They first have to buy US dollars. So central banks all over the world had to do what? They had to purchase our currency. So that created a demand, a global demand for the US dollar. That demand is what gives, when you have a high demand, you have high value. So that demand for the US dollar on the open market for oil, because these countries, if they wanted to buy oil, they had to buy the US dollars, aka petrodollars as well, which is pinned to the dollar. So they had to buy these dollars in order to buy oil. That was in 1974, all the way up until 2001, when Saddam Hussein stood up and said, we are I'm sorry, this was in 2000, October of 2000.
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein stood up and said, we're no longer going to take US dollars for our oil. From now on, if you want oil from Iraq, you cannot pay us with the infidels' currency. We are now only going to accept food, which was the oil for food program, or euros. And when Saddam Hussein said that, everybody was like, "You're crazy! Euros? It's like the currency was on the verge of having to get bailed out. It had just sunk to its lowest point in its existence. It was a brand new currency at the time, and it was, I think, 82 cents to the dollar." And Saddam said, "I don't care. You have to pay me in euros." So what did that force every single country to do?
Drop their dollars and pick up euros.
They sold dollars. So everybody was selling dollars and they were buying euros. And what happens when your demand drops and everybody's selling? When you see a
nosedive on the charts,
selling, the value tanks. Now, when the value tanks, the value of the dollar tanks, it's not that bad because now exports of American goods goes up because other people's currencies are worth more because our dollar's worth less.
Yeah.
So everybody wants to buy American goods. So our exports go up. This is, basic economics concepts of how our system functions. Now, when that happened, the euro skyrocketed because everybody was buying it. And Saddam Hussein made a ton of money for Iraq. That was like one of the smartest things anybody's ever done. And other countries followed suit. Iran followed suit. Iran said, we're no longer going to take US dollars. Venezuela followed suit. And when all of this stuff started happening, all of a sudden, George Bush gets on the television and gives this axis of evil speech. And who does he include in the axis of evil? Every one of the countries that ditched the dollar. And how did he scare people into going over and invading these countries? Now, 9/11, after 9/11 happened, we invaded Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
Even though not one of those terrorists was from Afghanistan, but we invaded Afghanistan. Why did we invade Afghanistan?
Because we knew where they were.
That's where the Taliban was.
Yeah, we knew that's where they were.
But the Taliban wasn't responsible for 9/11. It wasn't the Taliban. We invaded, it was Al-Qaeda. We invaded Afghanistan, which was run by the Taliban, which we had them here just, a year before, trying to court them for this pipeline deal. And because we got turned down, next thing you know, our towers fall, our capital's attacked, and our military is on high alert, and we hightail it over to Afghanistan. Now, I have to add this part in. In 1962, okay, this little montage will take about 5 minutes, but it's extremely important to understand how we went over there. And some people will label it a conspiracy theory, but there's no theory to it. I'm not giving any theory. I'm only giving fact. And you can look these facts up. So in 1959, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara waged a revolution in Cuba, and they overthrew the government of Jose Baptista and kicked him out of Cuba. And Baptista was a huge, he was in bed with Italian mafia, right? So the mafia controlled a lot of the stuff in Cuba. Now, when these guys overthrew this government, and they overthrew it because the mafia pretty much turned Cuba into a hellhole, and they were tired of seeing it. Yeah. So they booted them out and took control of the government through revolution. And when they did this, the mafia looked for a way to get back into Cuba. So they turned around and they asked the president, or somebody who was running for president at the time, they said, "We'll help you get elected, but when you get elected, you need to help us to get back into Cuba." So he helped a man by the name of John Kennedy. I say he, but the mafia that got kicked out of Cuba helped Kennedy to get elected. And Kennedy was then tasked with getting Castro out of Cuba. And one of the first people he turned to was his director of the CIA, the man who pretty much invented the CIA, a man by the name of Allen Dulles. And Dulles goes to his Army intelligence buddy, his roommate, a man by the name of Prescott Bush. Now, if you don't know who Prescott Bush is, we had President Bush in 2000 who was George Walker Bush. Yep. And in 92, George Herbert Walker Bush. Yeah. George Herbert Walker Bush lost to Clinton in 92. 88.
No, he was in 88. George H.W. Bush was 88 to 92.
So George Herbert Walker Bush, it's his father. So most people call him Bush Sr., but technically they have different middle names, so it's not Senior and Junior.
Yeah.
But you have George Herbert Walker Bush's father. And Prescott Bush said, "Hey, you need to talk to my son." And Dulles contacts George Herbert Walker Bush and says, "Hey, look, I need you in intelligence." So Bush at the time was in a partnership with two brothers, Hugh and Bill Liedtke, and another gentleman that they had started a company called Zapata Petroleum. And the other guy was actually in the CIA as well. That today is called, it ended up being called Pennzoil, and then they changed it to HRG or something like that, some weird, that's one of the huge conglomerations. But George Bush originally started a company that became Pennzoil. Anyway, he took this assignment, joined up with the CIA, and the objective was to get rid of Fidel Castro. So they set up an operation off the coast of Cuba, and they set up a fake oil company, and they called it Zapata Offshore. And Bush was actually the head of this oil company, Zapata Offshore. And he had actually set it up a little bit before Dulles came to him, but so he sets up this company, and the goal is to get in and kill Fidel Castro. Well, when he did this, Castro knew he was coming. Russia had actually learned about the U.S.'s plans to invade Cuba. Kennedy was actually supposed to sign off on air support, which a plane was supposed to come and kind of carpet bomb the area where the boats were going to land, and the people that had been trained were going to get onto the island. But Castro was waiting for him. This was known as the Bay of Pigs fiasco.
The Bay of Pigs, yep.
And it was a huge embarrassment for Kennedy. And Kennedy turned around and he fired Allen Dulles from being the director of the CIA because the plan failed. And he still had to keep his promise to the mafia to take out Castro. So the CIA was still tasked with taking out Fidel Castro, killing Castro. Now, if you remember who was in charge of Operation Zapata, it was actually called Operation Zapata, which became known as the Bay of Pigs incident. But the man in charge of that was George Herbert Walker Bush. Well, the CIA came up with a new plan, and they turned it over to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Joint Chiefs of Staff took a peek at it, and the director, the secretary of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was a man by the name of Lyman Lemnitzer. Lemnitzer actually took a look at this, and he was like, well, what do you think? And the Joint Chiefs were all in agreement that it could possibly work. And it was called Operation Northwoods. And what ended up happening, Lemnitzer signs off on it. He turns it over to McNamara, who's the Secretary of Defense for Kennedy. McNamara takes one look at it, brings it to Kennedy, and he's like, take a look at what the CIA wants to do to take out Fidel Castro. And when Kennedy reads it, he sees that that it's absolutely insane. And he turns around and he tells Lemnitzer that he's not going to renew him as the Secretary of the Joint Chiefs because his name's on that document. Because he signed that document, he's no longer going to be endorsed by Kennedy. So what Operation Northwoods was, it was drawn up by the CIA. And remember who was in charge of this operation, George Herbert Walker Bush. This is what they wanted to do in 1962 to take out Fidel Castro. They wanted to hijack American airplanes, fly them into American buildings, blame it on Cuban terrorists, so it would be an act of war. And then the United States government could then go and attack Cuba with our military. So if you think about it, this operation looks a hell of a lot like the operation that just took place on September 11th.
Yeah.
And if we attacked ourselves so that we could go over to Afghanistan to take out the Taliban so that we could run this pipeline. Now, why would we want to run a pipeline from Afghanistan? Why do we want a pipeline in Afghanistan? If you think about it, Afghanistan touches China, right? So Afghanistan, and if you could in post-production just put up a map so that people can see that Afghanistan actually touches China, and on the other side, it actually touches Iran. I'm looking to see if I have a map downloaded for it right now. Oh, actually, here's something that I do have. This is actually pretty cool. This is the signed document for Lyman Lemnitzer. This is the document that Lemnitzer signed for justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. This was Operation Northwoods. And that was March 13th, 1962. So, and actually what I'm really looking for is the...
Yeah, I have it right here, actually. I might even be able to bring it up on my screen, perhaps. But if worst case, I will add it in post-production, but I think I can share my screen.
Yeah, that was the one map that I just forgot to download. Anyway, so you have Afghanistan and it touches China. So
can you see it?
Oh yeah. Let me blow this up a little bit. Hang on.
You can see Afghanistan and China. There's a little strip there between the two countries.
So if you look, the other side of Afghanistan is Iran, right?
Yep.
Now, if you look down a little bit, you'll see Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Now, remember who our ally was. Since 1945, we have been allies with Saudi Arabia. We actually have a base in Saudi Arabia, and we protect all their oil fields. That is why Saudi Arabia pegged oil to the dollar. They were the first ones that actually started doing this with us. So Saudi Arabia, what we wanted to do is get into this same game that Russia was getting into. You see, Russia started building all of these pipelines and running natural gas out of Siberia, because Siberia is the largest natural gas reserve in the entire planet. Then now I'm seeing myself. Okay, there you are.
Yeah, it's just because I was bringing it back to me.
So in Siberia, they have the largest natural gas reserve on the planet, and Russia is pulling all of that natural gas out, and they built these pipelines that go through Ukraine. This is why Ukraine is so important. Yeah. This is why there's so much happening with Ukraine. And Russia built these pipelines that go through Ukraine and deliver natural gas to Ukraine as well as most of Europe.
Yeah.
And also goes down the other way to China. So Russia's signing all of these huge energy deals with China, 25-year deals, China and Russia, where these countries say inside of the contract that they're going to buy X amount of gas from Russia, and they have to buy that much gas. So what ends up happening, Russia builds all these pipelines and starts making tons and tons of money. Now, we know that Russia was dead broke when Reagan was president, right? When Gorbachev was there, because it was the fall of communism. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. That's what Ronald Reagan was probably most famous for, most famous quote when they tore down the Berlin Wall. And in Russia, they had people standing in line with their freaking any valuables that they had in the house trying to get bread so that they could eat. Now, what ended up happening, you had this guy who was KGB, right? Putin. Putin starts coming up in Russia. And all of these gas deals start getting signed, inked. And Russia's gas company is called Gazprom. It's a state-owned company.
And you're talking about natural gas, right?
Natural gas, yeah. Not the type that you put in your car.
Yes, just wanted to clarify that for any viewers who might have gotten confused.
Yeah, it's the type that comes out of your stove there.
Yeah.
Or as we say up in New England, out of your stove, kid.
Yeah.
So you get all this natural gas that is making Russia rich quick. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, they were kind of kicked out of the G9, G8, whatever you want to call them, G10.
Yeah.
Now we call them the G8, because they didn't have much influence anymore. Well, that was until they started signing all these gas deals and building themselves back up. And that was with a quickness that they were able to do it.
You said the natural gas in Siberia, that's what they're using. That's what they're building these pipelines for. Is Siberia the largest collection, like concentration of natural gas in the world, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
We actually have a huge reserve here.
Yeah.
But thanks to activists, we don't get to frack. We don't get to explore that, except when guys like Donald Trump are in office.
Yeah.
And no joke, but Dick Cheney as well. And here's the thing with fracking in the United States. Now, I'm not 100% for fracking. I'm 100% for energy independence, but I'm not necessarily 100% for fracking.
Yeah.
I think fracking is a necessity, but it has to be done away from where people live.
Yeah.
Now,
Very
most people know about, where our biggest natural gas basin is?
No, I don't.
It's along the south shore of this country, by the Gulf.
Hmm.
Think about this for a minute. Do you remember the Event Horizon?
Yeah.
Do you remember that oil rig that started spewing all that oil into the ocean?
I'm sorry, not I need to correct you there. Not Event Horizon, Deepwater Horizon.
Deepwater Horizon, yes.
Yes,
no, Event Horizon was a pretty decent movie.
Event Horizon is a fantastic movie. Event Horizon, let's clarify for our viewers for a second here. Event Horizon is a really good movie, and you should see it. Event Horizon also refers to the edge of a black hole.
Yes.
Deepwater Horizon was a offshore deep water drilling, and it's, if you don't know, something went wrong and it poured hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil into the Gulf.
So that's something that went wrong. Was actually there was a team of people that was contracted to work on. Now the rig itself was owned by BP. If you don't know who BP is, it's British Petroleum. Obviously, it's owned by the Brits. So it's a Brit rig out there just taking oil out of the ocean, right? And there's a company that's contracted to work on the apparatus that goes down into the ocean. Do you know who that company was that was contracted to work on that?
Actually, I do. I do know who it was. It was Halliburton.
Yes, it was Halliburton. Now, What is so crazy about that? You see, Halliburton, before this Deepwater Horizon, not Event Horizon, Deepwater Horizon, right before this Deepwater Horizon blew up and started spewing all this oil into the ocean, right before that, Halliburton was going along the coastline on what they know to be the largest shale basin, which is what they frack to get the natural gas. Largest shale basin in our entire country. They were going in and trying to buy up all this land down there. And the problem is there were a lot of people that were holding out because they knew that fracking was no good. If you ever seen that, I can't remember the name of the documentary, but all I remember from it is people were turning on their water and lighting their water on fire because the gas was getting into it, and then their animals were getting sick and people were getting sick, and it was just a really, really bad deal and bad publicity. And I think Matt Damon actually made some kind of a movie about.
I think you're right. I think
this.
Yeah,
I remember him in some movie, but I can't remember what the name of it was or anything. It was a green movie.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny because with all of these things that were holding up these deals, the next thing you know, Halliburton gets the opportunity to work on one of these rigs and they blow the rig up, spilling oil into the ocean. And do you know what the oil did to all of the values of the properties all along the coastline that they were trying to buy?
No.
The value of all those properties plummeted.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Promised Land was the name of the documentary.
Promised Land, yeah, that was actually a pretty good film.
I actually didn't see that one. That's one I haven't seen actually. I'm a cinephile. I'll see a lot of movies, a lot of TV, but that's actually one I haven't seen.
Yeah, go watch that one. That one's pretty good. He starts out as a as a pretty much a salesperson. He's the guy that goes in and tries to get the people to sell, and then his eyes get open to exactly what it is that he's doing. And
they actually made a Deepwater Horizon. They actually made a Deepwater Horizon movie also. I believe it was with Mark Wahlberg. I haven't seen that one either. I need to see that one.
I'm gonna have to check that one out. Actually, I think Armageddon. In Armageddon, those guys were actually working on a rig just like this.
Yes, I believe you're right.
So yeah, there's a lot of movies out there that kind of touch here and there on on the subject matter. But so now we have Halliburton, trying to get all of these places, whether it's in this country or whether it's over in Afghanistan, which is where we went next. Now it's funny, while we were in Afghanistan, everybody was like, George Bush was like, we need to go into Iraq. And that was the weapons of mass destruction. They have all of these weapons of mass destruction. And everybody's like, we never found any weapons of mass destruction. We really did, though. We found a ton of weapons of mass destruction. We found chemical weapons, biological weapons. And the funny thing is the reason that they couldn't report on it is because they were ours.
Yeah.
We actually sold them to Iraq in the Iran-Iraq war. And Donald Rumsfeld he was the head of the company that sold the weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq war, to which the next day after he sold it to Saddam Hussein turned around and gassed the Kurds. I think it was mustard gas that he used. But coincidentally, Donald Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense under George Bush when we went into Iraq. And when we went into Iraq, everybody's like, we went in for the oil, which is funny. Like, we went in for the oil. George Bush's father originally went into Iraq and then turned around and got out with a quickness. And the reason he went into Iraq was because of Kuwait, because Saddam Hussein was invading Kuwait, which was a sovereign country and another member of OPEC. So we were there pretty much to protect Kuwait, and that was it. Yeah. And George Herbert Walker Bush actually made a smart decision by turning around and coming back. So when George Walker Bush decided he needed to go into Iraq, everybody thought, he's just going to finish his daddy's business. Yeah. But the reality is, the reason we went into Iraq has nothing to do with what most people get off of the idiot box. And the idiot box was telling people weapons of mass destruction if you were a Republican, and if you were a Democrat. I'm not sure what the liberal media was.
I believe it was human rights violations.
Well, yeah, they had the human rights violations. They had a protest on that for Afghanistan as well, because the Taliban, and that's originally what the Resolution 1267 was all about. It was their human rights violations and women, and like they were stringing people up in the streets, all kinds of stuff like that. And that was actually Resolution 1267 wasn't Afghanistan. It was Saudi Arabia, which was our ally in this whole ordeal. Yeah. And the crazy thing is, you want to put the conspiracy pieces together. Every single one of the terrorists, well, the majority of the terrorists from the 9/11 hijackings were all from Saudi Arabia. Most of them. I think there were a couple of them from Pakistan, but most of them were from Saudi Arabia, which is supposed to be our ally, which kind of makes sense if you think that it was an orchestrated event.
Yeah.
Very much like Operation Northwoods would have been, which is what the CIA wanted to do. So you have, you have this this attack on our country. We go over to Afghanistan. We take out the Taliban, and we start building our pipeline that we wanted in the first place, that they told us no. So we went over there and we took it. And then Saddam Hussein stood up in 2000, like I said, and he said, we're not going to take the US dollar anymore, which collapsed our currency. So what did Bush do? Bush went in there for one reason and one reason only: to flip the currency back, to make it so that the US dollar was again the standard currency for energy, oil, essentially. So we flipped the US dollar back, and he's on TV talking about the axis of evil, and he says Iraq, Iran, Venezuela. Now, why Iraq? So Iraq was a gateway. If you pull that map up again, we can see that, well, actually, that map might not have it. I think that map had Saudi Arabia, but it didn't go up into Iraq or up into Turkey.
You can see Iraq on the corner of it. Let me bring it up here just for a second.
So let me see if I can find see if you can find a map that actually has all of the Middle East, because we're going to need the Middle East. We're going to need Syria. We're going to need Israel in order to understand what Russia was trying to do and why Ukraine, what role Ukraine was playing in this whole ordeal. So the United States, when we came over here, we were trying to get into the natural gas game.
Oh, here we go. Look at this.
Hey,
ignore the arrows on it. Those arrows aren't mine.
Even got Egypt.
So yeah, this is a good one here.
Yeah, let me blow this up. So, looking at this map, right? We got Egypt. Now there was gas that was found in Egypt, and Egypt was toppled. Saudi Arabia helped to topple the government in Egypt, and it was the Muslim Brotherhood that they supported over there. And then Saudi Arabia, inside of helping Egypt to control that area, or helping to overthrow that government in Egypt, then took a piece of that government. And Egypt had a supply of natural gas. And they built a pipeline that went up all the way up to Turkey, but stopped. It went around Israel. And it was supplying gas to that region.
And again, now, we're talking about natural gas.
Natural gas, yep. One of the other places that was pulling out natural gas was Azerbaijan. And if you look on the map at Azerbaijan,
just to the left of the Caspian Sea.
Caspian Sea, right? And it's right above Iran.
Yes, now, right above Iran, right below Russia, right next to Georgia.
Azerbaijan was a really good. They had a really good supply of natural gas in there as well. Now, there was a huge supply of natural gas that was found in the Persian Gulf, and there were two countries pulling natural gas out of there. One of them was Qatar. Now, you kind of can't see Qatar on this map unless you really look hard, and you got to know where it is. If you look at Saudi Arabia, it looks like Saudi Arabia has a wart. And I don't want to.
Is that right at the end of the red arrow, actually? That's
that's Qatar. Yeah. And that little green area just below Iraq and just above Saudi Arabia, that's would be Kuwait.
Yeah, that's Kuwait. Yeah. So this is
so you have Qatar pulling natural gas out of the Persian Gulf. And what they want to do is they want to find a way to challenge Russia in this energy game, because Russia's making money hand over fist because there's no competition. Now, when I say there's no competition, when Russia built all of these pipelines, they were supplying a ton. Hang on one second. Let me just get to my pictures. So they were supplying. I'm going to show you. Let me see.
I apologize for the horn if it got picked up by the mic. That is my text message. Someone is messaging me while I'm shooting this.
All right. So take a look at this. This was, I believe it was in 2008. Okay. So this is the amount of dependence that European countries had on Russia for their gas. So if you look, Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, and Estonia, all 100% natural gas from Russia. Macedonia, 100%. Belarus, 98%. All of these countries, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Greece, Hungary, Croatia, Switzerland, Turkey, Ukraine, 66% of their energy, 66% of the energy in Ukraine. Well, I have the, I don't know if you can put my my screen back up, but I have the breakdown of all the countries.
Yeah, you have the breakdown up, and on my screen I have a map of Europe, so you can see the countries. So on Dave's side of the screen,
does it show
the list of the countries, and on my side of the screen, it should be a map of the European countries.
So you can see all of these countries have this massive dependence on Russia for energy. So what that, if you think about that, right?
Dave, hold on. Before you continue, name a few and what their dependency is, just so that way I can show them here on the map on my side.
So how about Estonia?
Estonia. Yep, they're right up here. They border right next to Russia.
Yep, just below there, Latvia and Lithuania.
Yep, Latvia, Lithuania.
All of them are 100%. How about Finland right above there?
Yep, Finland above it.
Yep, all 100% reliant on Russian gas.
These four countries right here, as you can see.
Yeah. So now you get into you get deeper into Europe. If you look at Ukraine, which should be the purple country on there, Ukraine, 66% of their energy is from Russia. Greece,
66% for Ukraine. That's Greece.
Greece is down here. 76% reliance on Russia. Now you get into the heart of Europe. Let's get into Bulgaria, Romania. All of these countries, right in the heart right there.
Yep.
They have huge
there you are, Bulgaria and Romania. I'm sorry, I was a little off there, but there they are.
Yeah, Bulgaria, Romania, Austria, Hungary. See that Austria, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, and how it goes down into Turkey?
Yes, down right here.
That area right there, they actually created their own pipeline. They created their own pipeline that had no gas in it. And it stopped in Turkey. It started in Austria, and it stopped in Turkey. And it was called the Nabucco pipeline. And that pipeline, the Nabucco pipeline, it was actually a pipeline that they wanted somebody to bring their gas into this pipeline so that they could have competition, so that they weren't completely reliant on Russia. Now, if you remember when Donald Trump was president, Donald Trump kind of scolded a lot of these countries for having these gas deals with Russia and telling them that Russia is essentially controlling their politics. Because if Russia doesn't like something that you're doing, they can just shut you off.
Yeah, they can just shut
your
you
energy
off. Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah, they can just shut your energy off right here. We talked about these four countries: Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, 100% reliant. Ukraine, more than 70%. Greece, more than 60%.
So here's an updated list of all the pipelines that Russia built, and this is more recently. They didn't always have all of these pipelines. They've been building these pipelines for a while.
I'm gonna leave my map up too, so that way you can actually see the comparison of where the pipelines are in the countries.
So the first pipelines that they built were the ones that go through Ukraine. The second pipelines they built are the ones that you see through Belarus.
Belarus, yeah.
Which is just above Ukraine, because they had to try and go around Ukraine, because what was happening, and this is what started all of the problems with Ukraine, is Ukraine was siphoning gas out of those pipelines. And it was Ukraine's gas company that was doing it. And they weren't paying for it.
Oh.
And they got caught doing it.
Oh.
And when they got caught, Russia turned around and said, you owe us, I think it was $4 billion for the gas that you siphoned. And this started a whole bunch of skirmishes. People might remember, I think it was in 2005 and then 2010. There were all kinds of skirmishes with Ukraine and Russia where Russia shut off all the gas going to Ukraine in the middle of winter. But the problem is those pipelines also were 15% of all of Europe's gas.
Yeah.
So it put Europe into a crunch for energy. And it forced the European Union to get involved with the Ukraine and Russia disputes. And now I'm going to pull my timeline up real quick, because this is where we start getting into some of the issues that Russia was having with Ukraine. And it came with all of these, all of the disputes over the pipeline that was going through Ukraine, and how they were, how they had been stealing gas. So you had in 2005, Ukraine, that's when Ukraine was originally caught stealing gas out of the Russian pipelines. And those are the pipelines that brought the gas to Europe. So January 1st of 2006, Russia shut off all the gas supplies that were going through Ukraine. And 3 days later, they turned everything back on. They came to an agreement. They turned everything back on. But about a year and a half later, new disputes over gas debts that Ukraine wasn't paying to Russia. And there were, it's weird, because it's like, you would think, somebody comes out and reads our meter, right? And they say, okay, this is how much energy you used, and this is how much you owe us based off of how much energy you've used. So it's almost like energy's nothing more really than a tax. Because, they create it and they charge to create it, right?
Yeah.
And so we have a meter that tells us how much we have to pay.
Yeah.
Well, you would think that they would have these big ass meters, but sometimes it's hard to tell where the gas where the gas goes, especially if
Yeah.
a company's siphoning it, in the middle of their country.
Yeah.
They attach something to to an existing pipeline and just start siphoning gas out of that pipeline.
Yeah.
So that was in 2007. There were new disputes. And in March of 2008, Russia reduced the supply of gas to Ukraine. And they were fighting over how much Ukraine actually owes Russia. By 2009, now these disputes have been going on and off and on and off for a while.
Yeah.
And if you remember, inside of this, there was also a case where Russia had invaded the country of Georgia, not the state Georgia, but the country Georgia.
Yeah.
And the reason they invaded Georgia, if you remember, now I said that the United States has been trying to get into this gas game, right? So we partnered up with Saudi Arabia, and you have Qatar pulling natural gas out of the Persian Gulf, and they're trying to take a pipeline and bring it up to, remember I was telling you the Nabucco pipeline ended in Turkey.
Yeah.
Well, that Nabucco pipeline that ended in Turkey, the Europeans, they wanted somebody to bring some natural gas in there. And if Egypt was going to bring it in, it had to go through Syria. If Qatar was going to bring it in, it went from Qatar into Saudi Arabia. They had to go through Iraq. So where did the United States invade next? We invaded Iraq.
I'm going to bring the map up one more time quick.
Yeah.
So if it came from Egypt, it has to go through Syria on its way to Turkey, and then
On its way to
Europe.
Turkey.
And then if it comes from Qatar, what were we saying about if it comes from Qatar?
If it comes from Qatar, it's going to go through Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
And then they were bringing it up to Iraq. Now, once it's in Iraq, it goes in two directions. One direction, it goes to Europe, and the other direction, it goes to China.
Yeah,
now, look on the other side. What borders Iraq? In order to get to China, you have to go through Iran and Afghanistan, right?
Yep.
So where did the United States first take over? Afghanistan.
Yep.
Then we went to Iraq.
Yep.
And then we're beating the war drums, and what did we say? We need to go into Iran. Iran is making nuclear weapons, right?
Yeah.
There was this whole nuclear deal with Iran, and Iran was violating. We said Iran's violating all of these, this nuclear treaty we have with them, and that they're making a nuclear bomb, and we don't want to wake up one day to a mushroom cloud, right? This is how they were justifying going into Iran, especially to the people. They weren't telling the people what this whole thing was about. This whole thing is about energy dominance. And what they were doing is when we took over Afghanistan, that gave us a gateway to China. When we took over Iraq, that was the point where we could go in either direction.
Yeah.
We could go to Europe and we could go to China.
Yeah.
So to get to Europe, we had to go through Syria. And to get to China, we had to go through Iran. So what did Russia do? Do you remember what Russia did? All anybody was talking about was when we were about to go into Iran, Russia threatened us. Why did Russia threaten us? Russia said, and it wasn't necessarily a direct threat to us, but the threat that Russia made to us, Russia said, if you go into Iran and you try to do anything in Iran, we are going to bomb Saudi Arabia. And why did they say they were going to bomb Saudi Arabia? Because that's where the pipelines come out of. They go from Qatar into Saudi Arabia up into Iraq. And Russia knows that what we're trying to do is create these pipelines that are going to be a competition for them.
Yeah.
So now we have this this war that's being waged in these lands far off, right? And this war is not about anything that the idiot box is telling anybody. They're reporting only what the government is telling them to report. Oh, yeah, weapons of mass destruction, just weapons of mass destruction, and then mushroom clouds and the weapons of mass destruction. And then that's all you heard all over the news.
Yeah.
And then Bush is elected twice on this. Bush was probably the dumbest president we've ever had. I would say Biden. But
oh man, Biden,
Bush,
yeah, maybe.
Yeah, Bush was pretty much dumb as a box of rocks. And the real brains of that organization.
At least he could pronounce a box of rocks.
Well, that depends. He would pronounce it kind of crooked, like nuclear.
Yeah.
The word nuclear, he pronounces as nuclear. Is it nuclear or is it nuclear?
But Biden can't even remember, we were all born, the thing.
Yeah, the thing. No, I like his most recent gaffe where he's like, he was in a interview with, I want to say it was 60 Minutes, and oh my goodness, they asked him about his focus, and his answer was classic. I can't even repeat it. It was so bad.
That up. I can't wait to look that up.
But it is the funniest thing, because you like, if you were to actually write out what he says,
yeah,
you're like, what the?
Yeah.
What is this guy talking about?
Yep.
Something about a fly. Like, what the hell?
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
But here's George Bush, and the real brains of the administration was Dick Cheney, and Dick Cheney with Halliburton. Now, what most people don't know, Halliburton was started a long time ago, but it merged with a company called Dresser Industries. And most people don't know the Bushes used to work in Dresser Industries. And there's a couple, I don't know, most people don't know, most people might know George Bush's brother.
Jeb.
Well, did you know Jeb is not his name?
Yes, I do actually. I do know that. Yeah.
It's actually an acronym for his name.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just his initials. Yep.
And his name is actually John Ellis Bush.
Yep.
And it's kind of funny that we got this family heavily involved in Dresser Industries, of which Prescott Bush actually sat on the board of Dresser Industries, which became Halliburton. Which, not that it became Halliburton, but it was kind of merged into Halliburton. And sat on the board of, I want to say it was Harriman. What the heck was the name of the company? Harriman.
I think you're right, actually. I think it is Harriman.
And Harriman, I think, owned Kellogg, and then they ended up buying Brown and Root, or when they merged, it was Brown and Root. Anyway, trying to remember the name of the CEO for Dresser Industries. His name was Henry Neil Mallon. I don't know why that just came to me.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like, I have some weird stuff in my head. But Henry Neil Mallon was the CEO of Dresser Industries. Now, what's absolutely insane, Dresser Industries, ends up merged with Halliburton. Halliburton run by Dick Cheney, who becomes George Bush's vice president. Well, Dresser Industries, Henry Neil Mallon. Do you know what George Bush's other brother's name is? Besides, he's got another brother named Marvin.
No, I actually don't know his other brothers. No.
So Marvin Bush is one of his other brothers, and the other guy is Henry, right? It was Henry Neil Mallon was the guy who was in charge of who was the CEO of Dresser Industries. George Bush's other brother's name is Neil Mallon Bush, named after the guy who was the head of Dresser Industries.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird when you look at how intertwined all of these things are, where Dresser Industries goes and becomes part of Halliburton, which has Dick Cheney as the CEO, who becomes his running mate. And now they're in Europe and the Middle East creating pipelines for Halliburton, specifically for Halliburton, to challenge Russia on the global stage for this new energy. And the new energy was natural gas.
Yeah.
Oil is the old economy. Natural gas is the new economy. And Russia was building an empire without any resistance. And we were watching an ocean away like, how the heck did they just build themselves up that quick?
Yeah.
So we wanted in on it. So when we went over there, we brought everything up to Iraq. And then when we were going to go into Iran, Russia brought a warning and said, you will not go into Iran. Most people remember, what was his name? Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad was the head of Iran at the time. And everybody was like, oh, we're going to go in, we're going to take out Ahmadinejad. And then over in Syria, all of a sudden we started beating the war drums in Syria. And we're like, oh, we're going to go into Syria. And the guy that was running Syria, like I have a lot of friends that were from Syria, and they loved this guy. And he was a Christian. The dude was a Christian, but they were painting him out to be a bad dude. Why? Because we needed to run a pipeline through Syria, and he wouldn't let us.
Yeah.
And Russia made a deal with them. And Russia then came down and protected the Syrian president so that we couldn't run those pipelines through Syria to get to the Nabucco pipeline, which, the Nabucco pipeline was built and nothing ever went through it.
Yeah.
There was the other country that I was talking about, Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan was going to attempt to bring their gas over and sell their gas in the Nabucco pipeline, and that's when Russia invaded Georgia. And if you look on that map, the reason Russia invaded Georgia is because Georgia is right in between Azerbaijan and Turkey. Azerbaijan had to go through Georgia.
Where am
Azerbaijan.
Oh, over here. Yeah, here we go. Right here.
Yeah, so Azerbaijan had to go through Georgia to get to Turkey.
Yeah. Because I can't see what the country is between Azerbaijan and Turkey.
Is it
my other map?
Country or is it water?
Oh, is it water? Honestly, I can't. No, this one won't let me. No, won't let me view in. You might be right. It might be water. No, I don't think so. I think it's a country.
Is it a country? That country, I don't know. But so Russia is over there and getting involved anytime somebody wants to try to bring anything, any type of gas into these pipelines. And these pipelines ended up dying. No gas ever went through them. They built these pipelines and they just sat there empty. And the Europeans built them so that somebody could eventually bring gas into them. And I think today they have different countries that are bringing gas in there. But back when all of this stuff was, had started playing out, Russia was dominating everybody. And I do have. This is all the, this is all the pipelines that exist now for Russia. And you can see just above in this area here, that's the Nord Stream pipeline.
Yeah.
And that is the pipeline that was just blown up. Our media is saying that Russia blew it up. That is the stupidest thing. If anybody out there believes that Russia blew up their own pipeline, they're absolute freaking morons, and they have no idea about anything. All they do is they believe anything they're told by the television. And those are the people who are the reason why this country's in the situation it's in right now. Because they get all their information from the idiot box. And those people are controlling public opinion by using that. This was a system that was devised back in the 1960s. It was called Operation Mockingbird. And Operation Mockingbird, the CIA wanted to use. They wanted to infiltrate news media. They wanted to infiltrate television. They wanted to infiltrate newspapers, Hollywood. They wanted to infiltrate all of these different areas, because if they controlled those areas, or they had voices in those areas, they could control the narrative of any situation and control public opinion by doing that. And the U.S. uses it very, all the time. And I'll tell you what. If you were to look at Ukraine's history, and one of the reasons why Russia went into Ukraine, it was because of all these disputes. That was definitely one of the things, disputes on how much money was owed to them over these gas deals. But also, what most people don't know is the political makeup. This is the political makeup of Ukraine. What do you notice about it?
It's split in two.
Yeah, pretty much right down the middle.
Yeah.
And there's some deep reds and some deep blues. Now, this isn't Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
What it is, and if I was the person that made this, I probably would have reversed the colors. I would have put red on the bottom and blue on the top. And the reason I would have done that is because all the blue areas that you see on this map, they're Russia friendly.
Yeah.
They vote with Russia. They vote for Russians when they run for president. And all the areas that you see that are red on the map, they are very much more the European. They favor Europeans. They favor the European models. They favor everything to do with Europe. And think about it. Those people are closer to Europe, and the other people are closer to Russia.
Yeah.
Now, here's the crazy thing. If you know history, now the history of Ukraine is absolutely bananas. You see, Ukraine used to be part of Russia when it was the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And when it was the Soviet Union, let's say World War II, Russia made an agreement with Germany. And when they made the agreement with Germany, what happened was Russia pulled all their troops off of the Ukrainian border because of an agreement that they had with Germany not to invade Russia. Well, Germany made that agreement so that Russia would pull their troops off that border.
Yeah.
And then the largest military invasion in the history of the world took place.
Yeah.
Where the Germans invaded Russia. Now, here's a crazy thing. Germans were, at the time, they were Nazis, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Nazis invaded the Western Front of Ukraine. And when the Nazis invaded the Western Front of Ukraine, when they went in there, do you know what those Ukrainians did?
Let
They
them pass.
joined them.
Yeah.
They joined them. And did you know that I actually wrote an entire article on this on Americas Tribune on the history of Ukraine, and you can go and check it out there and see the actual detailed timeline. I'm kind of going off of my memory right now, but in Ukraine, when that happened, all of these Ukrainians joined up with the Nazis, and they made this big push. And what's crazy is there was one Ukrainian who was famous for killing over 30,000 Jews. Yeah, it wasn't just the Germans who were killing them. The Ukrainians killed 31 Ukrainian, one man was responsible for killing 30,000 Jews. And this man was honored by one of the recent presidents of Ukraine. Think about that. This man was honored by one of the recent presidents of Ukraine. Ukraine, the red area of Ukraine, is loaded with Nazis. And I'm not talking like, hidden Nazis. I'm talking out in the open. Their military brigades use swastikas on their emblems. They are straight up Nazis. Those Nazis are who you're supporting when you fly that Ukrainian flag in support of Ukraine. They're Nazis. And this is straight history. And the problem is people don't know their history.
Yeah.
So when the idiot box tells them we need to support Ukraine, if you only knew what you were supporting. And the majority of people I see supporting them, I think it's kind of funny. They're Democrats. And the Democrats are saying, we have such a problem with white supremacy. All of these white supremacists and the whiteness of people is terrible.
Yeah.
Yet here they are supporting Ukraine, who is made up of, take a look at I think it's called the Azov Battalion. You look at the Azov Battalion, and these guys, their swastikas on their emblems.
Yeah.
They're straight up Nazis. That's what you're supporting when you're supporting Ukraine. And I'm not, I have no feelings whatsoever about it. I'm not pro Putin. Well, if you don't like Ukraine, then you're pro Russia.
Yeah.
You're an election denier.
Yeah.
They want to sling names. They want to cover you in names, and that's all they do. They don't want to talk about facts. They don't want to talk about history. They don't want to talk about the reality of what's going on. Do you know why? Because they don't even understand it.
Yeah.
If people actually started studying this stuff or researching it or doing their own homework and stop listening to the freaking idiot box, they would get to see what is really going on.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
Well, that's why we do.
What's that?
That's why we do what we do, though, with our episodes and our media outlets, though. We try and bring fact and truth to people.
Yeah. I mean, right now, I see this country. They're putting white supremacists. They're putting Nazis up on a pedestal, and we're giving them billions of dollars. And I mean, this is a whole other, this can be a whole other episode for that. But the reality is, because the Republicans are taking over the House, hopefully, if the Republicans take over the House, we're going to see investigations into what they're dubbing it the Biden crime family.
Yeah.
But what we're really going to see is the teeth behind this. And you have Hunter Biden over there, and you have, Burisma, you have all of these. When Biden was, what they say, a quid pro quo, right? Where you give something and you get something, right?
Yeah.
He was trying to get an investigation called off on his son.
Yeah.
And he got that. And here's the weird thing. You look at this pandemic, you look at the pandemic that just happened. And you got to wonder, and obviously this is another whole episode, but you got to wonder, Biden was part of the Obama administration, which gave $7 million to Fauci to give to Wuhan. And we gave the $7 million, we gave 3.7 of the $7 million to Wuhan. And we gave this money to them to jump bat coronavirus into humans, to essentially create COVID. And they were able to do it. Obama did this in 2014.
Yeah. People don't realize that either. And you're right. That's a whole nother episode that I definitely wouldn't mind covering. Because people don't know about COVID either. They don't.
Well,
they
what's
have no
the significance?
Idea.
What's the significance of Ukraine in that?
I don't know that.
So these Wuhan was only one of the biolabs that we gave money to. Did you know that we financially support over 20 more biolabs in Ukraine?
Oh.
Doing all of the same stuff. And when all of this information started leaking out about Ukraine, the United States government denied everything. We don't have biolabs in Ukraine. There's no biolabs in Ukraine. We don't have biolabs in Ukraine. And then all of a sudden, and it's funny that this same woman, and man, I can't remember her name right now. Damn it. Anyway, this woman was called before Congress and she couldn't lie about it. And she was asked about these biolabs. And she had to answer on them. And she said, yeah, we financially support these biological facilities. They're not biolabs, they're biological facilities. And all of a sudden, they were telling everybody that this was Russian disinformation. It's all Russian disinformation. And the reality was, it wasn't Russian disinformation. It was American disinformation that they were giving to the American people.
Yeah.
Our own government was feeding us disinformation.
Yeah. The mainstream media complex.
It actually used to be illegal for our government to do that. Do you know who took that away?
No, I don't actually, but I do know that it used to be illegal.
Yeah, Barack Obama. It was actually it was in the National Defense Authorization Act. There was a small piece that he put in there to take away before it was legal for us to do propaganda in other countries, but not in our own media. Yeah. And they took that provision away and made it so that now the U.S. government can use propaganda against its own people.
And what's worse is I know people. I have friends who are Barack Obama fans and supporters and stuff, and they would never even, if I told them that, if I showed them proof of it, they still wouldn't believe it.
I mean, you got to put your party politics aside and actually look at how everything is happening, all the things that are transpiring around you. How does these things are happening for a reason?
Yeah, and people identify, they're so tribal now, if you attack even their position on things or what they think on things, then you're attacking them personally, and people can't separate their opinions or what they think are facts from, an attack on themselves, and that's even more ridiculous.
I didn't vote for Trump in 2016 because I thought he was a.
Neither did I.
POS.
Neither did I. I said, there's no way I can't vote for a reality TV star. In fact, in 2016, what I did, it was my version of what I would call a split ticket. I voted for crooked Hillary, and then voted Republican ticket to the rest of the way down. So that way, I figured, I was like, well, if I'm not going to vote for Trump in the White House, then let's at least give the Republicans the House and the Senate.
I actually did a write-in. So I wrote in Ron Paul.
Ron Paul.
Yeah. I was a huge Ron Paul fan. I was actually very surprised. Him running on a Republican ticket. That was, he had been a libertarian, carrying all these libertarian ideas and ideologies, and then ran on a Republican ticket. And actually, in my opinion, he actually won that the primaries. He had all the delegates. John Bonner changed the rules at the RNC, and that's how Mitt Romney was selected to represent the Republican Party.
Yeah, and there was no voting for him. He's an idiot. So to recap the war in Russia and Ukraine, if you could recap it for us, what is it's about gas.
Yeah, it was essentially about broken deals in Ukraine, pretty much stealing all kinds of stuff. And what I had just started getting into was the elections. So what most people don't know is the United States interfered in the elections. And the reason why I was talking about the woman who went before Congress and had to talk about those biolabs is because she was the woman who engineered the coup that overthrew the president, who was a Russian friendly president in 2014. In 2014, there was this Russian favored president or Russian backed president who was elected, and they overthrew him using, now this is going to blow your mind. So you had all of this stuff that was going on, right, in Ukraine, and they had a president who in 2013, let me start with 2013. So November of 2013 was the beginning of what was called the Maidan Uprising, which was this massive wave of demonstrations and civil unrest in Kiev. And they started when the Ukrainian elected president who won their elections in a democratic process, he backed out of a deal with the European Union, and it was the EU Ukraine Association Agreement. And he backed out because he didn't want closer ties with Europe, he wanted closer ties with Russia. And because he wanted closer ties with Russia, the America decided to go in and cause chaos. And what did we do to cause the chaos? What did we do to create a coup? We went in and we set up huge protests all over the country. Now tell me if this sounds familiar. This was the same woman, Democrat, same woman who had to testify before Congress about the biolabs in Ukraine. But they set up all of these huge protests. They set up encampments around government buildings. They took over these government buildings, set up autonomous zones. Sound familiar?
Yep.
They staged a coup doing this. And when the police came in, when the police came in to try to create order out of the chaos that they had brought all of these protesters in to create, when the police came in, there was a massive brawl that broke out, and 100 protesters died and 13 police officers died. And guess what was plastered all over every media because they controlled the media? Guess what was plastered all over every single media outlet all over the world? That president was responsible for going in after protesters. How dare you go in after protesters?
Yeah. Just like the protesters we had here.
And these protesters, when they set up their areas, their autonomous zones, they were all in like these makeshift uniforms with helmets and shields and sticks and rocks and glass bottles full of gasoline and like the
Molotovs
rag. Yeah. Petrol bombs.
Yeah, Molotovs.
So they effectively ran out the president of Ukraine. And when they ran the president of Ukraine out, they then installed a new president who turned around and signed this EU agreement. So this was the United States stepping in and overthrowing Ukraine's president, who was democratically elected and friendly to Russia. He was democratically elected by, remember on that map, the blue area. Yeah, so those people won the election. And what did Russia do right after that? The very next day.
They invaded.
No, the very next day. This was back in 2014, remember?
Oh, okay.
So the very next day after all of this stuff started and the president was run out of the country, Russia invaded Crimea.
Yeah.
So Russia went into Crimea and then annexed Crimea as part of Russia. And now that's what they're doing, systematically going through all of those areas and annexing them back to Russia.
Yeah.
Why? Because the United States stepped in on their elections and overthrew their government, the government that was being friendly to Russia. And that would have stopped all the bickering between Russia and
Ukraine. The EU. Yeah. Oh, and Ukraine. Yeah. No, I misspoke there. Between Russia and Ukraine, yeah.
Now, here's the crazy thing, too, is that same profile, the autonomous zones, the massive protests, that same profile was used to create a coup on Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And they were successful. They were successful in Ukraine and they were successful in the United States. They created the coup. They set up all of these protesters to take these huge, massive protests to take place all over the country. And what could a president do? Absolutely nothing.
Well,
if you go in with troops, what's going to be all over the news?
You're absolutely right, and that is, but see, that's one area where I think if I was Trump, and I get why he didn't, I understand why he didn't, but I think I probably would have. What I would have done.
Well, he wanted to.
I would have done it constitutionally. I would have called the governors of all these states and said, activate your National Guard.
Well, think about the states that they did it in. They didn't do it in Republican states.
Exactly. And the Democratic
governors. They did it all in Democrat states.
Yep. And the Democratic governors were happy to watch their states burn to the ground.
Yeah. Some of the Democrat governors actually got beat up inside of these protests.
Yeah, because they're stupid. Because they think these people are not on your side. That's none of these people. All these people who are on the left, they're being held together by a coalition of lies.
Yeah, and the problem is they don't even realize that they're in that.
No, Antifa and Nazis are not with the LGBTQ plus community. They are not your friends. In fact, as soon as they win, you're the first ones they're going to get rid of.
Yeah, go to any of these socialist countries.
Yeah.
Those people have to hide.
Yeah, and they don't understand it, but that's the way it is
They
right
don't
now.
think. They don't use their brains. They believe anything that they're being told, and they just repeat it.
Yeah.
Because the government has done a great job setting up this system where all they do is they stand up on a podium and they dictate to the media, and the media takes what they say, and instead of scrutinizing it, which is what the media is supposed to do, the media turns around and just repeats it back to the people.
Yeah. There's no investigation anymore. There's no
journalism.
There's no journalism. Absolutely not. Yeah. There's no journalism. Yeah. And I would fully agree with that, which is one of the reasons why I started the Boiling Point podcast. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was very informative. I know it was a very long episode. I likely won't separate this because I don't know that I could do it in a place that it would make sense. So it's a long episode. If you're still watching, then kudos to you for trudging through everything. 2 hours is no joke on an episode. Not to shoot and do this episode either, and plus I'll still have to produce it afterwards.
This was actually the abridged version. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. No, really though. I mean,
there were a lot of areas that I didn't go into in those areas. Like if you think about it, some of those areas are like important to understand, like how different areas are affected. So,
which is why we did this episode. Which is why it is so long, because we wanted to make sure that if you're watching this, you understand and you understand the history, and because it's not just as simple as, it's about gas. I mean, that's the short answer, but it's not the whole answer.
I mean, if you think about it, I started with the dollar, so you had an understanding of, by the time I get to the gas, we went from the dollar, we brought it to what the dollar was valued with. It was originally valued with gold, and then all the gold was gone. And what I mean by gone is when we borrow all of this money, every time we borrow it, we tell the Federal Reserve we're going to pay it back, and the Federal Reserve takes our gold until we have no more gold. And it's not that we don't have gold. The gold is still in Fort Knox. The gold is still there. It's just it went from the Treasury's books to the privately owned Federal Reserve's books.
Yeah.
And those pieces of paper became pieces of paper until they signed a deal with OPEC and said those pieces of paper are now backed by oil.
Yeah.
And oil became the new currency, or became what backed the new currency. And then oil started to become the old economy, the old energy, and the new energy was natural gas. And that's why we're fighting over everything, because we're jockeying to try to become the major player in the natural gas game. And that's why George Bush had Dick Cheney as his vice president.
Please share this episode out. Leave us a comment if you would like to, about any of the particulars you heard. And please share it out. That's why we do these episodes, to inform people, and hopefully found it a little bit entertaining as well. Americas Tribune, you can follow them: Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter. The Boiling Point Podcast, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, and for those still on Parler, we do have a Parler profile. JDEDESIGNz, Facebook and Instagram. On Instagram, it's JDE Poster Designs. That's with a Z at the end of it. And Marcus Frederiksen, he is going to play us out. Reverb Nation / Marcus Frederiksen.
Americas Tribune is also on Instagram.
Oh, Americas Tribune is also on Instagram. And AmericasTribune.com is their main hub. That's where you can find their articles and sources to their videos and stuff like that as well. So check that out.
All the stuff that I was just talking about, I'm doing a timeline article on it all right now.
Yep. So check that out. Look for the timeline article, and that's where the source material will be. I will also have links to Roos's episode where he talks about the issues with Syria, and that was back in 2014 that I recorded the episode, but it's extremely relevant with what's happening still in Russia. So I will have the link to that in the description of this video, as well as the links to everything that I said, to links to all of our media outlets, and to Marcus Frederiksen and his music. Share out his music and use the hashtag normalize the good or the humankind. For Dave Rooslet, I am your host, JD, and that's the end. I'm not around, have you found I'm always on you?